Good afternoon. I'm Steve Lowry, the editor of the Hilo. And no, I'm not looking down on you on some kind of arrogant level. I just have a weird laptop. It has a camera down here and I look down. Anyways, welcome to Live Chat. Today we're going to be speaking about Local Lives, which is an event that will be taking place on Thursday. Thursday, right, guys?
Yep.
And it involves getting people telling their stories about, well, in some cases about journalism, in some cases just about living life. I'm joined by my terrific colleague, Stephanie Rivera. Hi, Steph.
Hello.
And by Local Lives, McCardle Henkin, who joins us from Sacramento, right, McCardle?
Yeah, that's right. Currently in Sacramento, but typically based in San Francisco.
Where we just found out 3 minutes
Yeah.
ago, he knows my son. And he's heard his band, Jerry's Timeshare. And yes, we could do a whole show about Jerry's Timeshare, but no, we're doing Local Live. So let's get started with this first. Steph, let me start with you. Let's just lay the groundwork. Local Lives, when and where, how, let's just find out where people can access this and just in a general way, what they'll get.
Yeah, it's Local Lives. It's the virtual storytelling event that Back Pocket Media, which Ricardo has co-founded, is working with us closely to produce. And it's this Thursday at 7 p.m. It'll be on Zoom, just how we're doing it right now. And once folks register and get their tickets, they'll get a registration link, a Zoom link, and they'll be able to join us. And it's about an hour long, and it's going to feature three of our community members from Long Beach sharing their stories, doing a performance. And then we have two of our own journalists, Jeremiah and Krista, who will be talking about kind of behind the scenes of their reporting process. And folks can get their tickets. I think one of my colleagues is going to be putting a little Eventbrite link on the comments section, make it easy, but you can also just go to lbpost.com and we have a nice little banner there that makes it easy to get your tickets too.
Does it cost or is this a free event?
It's $5.
Okay.
So very small fee, and it
Right.
just goes right back into the community and into our storytellers for their work that they've been doing for us.
And McCardle, we're going to be hearing from, well, at least on our end, our colleagues Jeremiah Dobrook and our friend Crystal. Jeremiah, in fact, if people are interested, Jeremiah did a story about a year ago about a rather infamous incident that involved someone being killed with a scooter. And he wrote what ended up being an award-winning piece about that. Jeremiah, in his piece, will be talking about how that story came about, the reporting end of it. He'll kind of give you a vision into not only the story itself, but how the story went about being told, which I guess, McCardle, in some ways leads us to you. With the people, we're gonna have 5 different storytellers.
That's right.
It's funny, I have experience with this too. If you just tell someone, well, just tell your story, it sounds like the easiest thing in the world. It is, but anytime you say, okay, go, people normally just go. Tell us, when you're working with storytellers, how do you get them to end up telling their story the best way they can?
Yeah, that is certainly one of the biggest challenges of what we do, is finding the stories. Like you said, you always draw blank stares from people when you ask them to tell you an interesting story. Number one, they have to sort of go through, 21 years of life and pick a single moment out to tell you. And then of course, if you preface it with that you want something interesting or funny, well, then the pressure sort of surmounts there and becomes, I think, unbearable for most people, to the point where they go, well, I don't know, I'm not interesting. And that's
Right.
the answer we get most often, is I'm not interested. But of course, that's not true. I think I think everyone that's ever said that has ended up having an interesting story. And then so really for us, we kind of get pushed back on our heels and we go, okay, well, let's take a step back. How can we rephrase this question? Why don't you tell me the story of your first kiss, or of the first car that you ever had. Tell me about a time when you got caught doing something wrong. And you start to get more specific, and it's sort of counterintuitive, but we found that the more specific you get with your questions, oftentimes the easier it is for people to pull a story out. And once the wheel starts spinning, and sometimes offering your own story too to the person that you're engaging, really gets the wheels turning. And then from there, it becomes a lot of fun in finding what story they want to tell, because more times than not, there's more than one.
McArdle, Steph, either of you jump in here. Can you just give us a list of the 5 people who will be giving talks, and just the briefest kind of explanation of what their particular subjects is going to be?
So I don't know if maybe McCarter knows more, because I know Tay, who's been training them all. If you can kind of speak to that, I know who they are, but
Sure.
even I'm kind of left in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 4 really compelling speakers this time, 2 from the newsroom and 2 Long Beach locals that have not much to, or if anything, they have nothing to do with the Long Beach Post. They're sort of living their lives and working independently. And these are people that Stephanie connected us to, community members that she sort of flagged as people that might have something to contribute. Jeremiah, he's telling the story of Broken, of course, of that horrific murder with the scooter. And he goes into his reporting process and talks about what it was like to sort of peel back the layers of that story. Sort of on face value, it was a brutal murder, but he, through his reporting, was able to find out that there was actually much more to that story. So you'll be hearing that. Crystal Niebla, another reporter for the Long Beach Post, is telling a story of, again, on the surface, kind of showing up to a crime scene and being a reporter and trying to get what seemed like the obvious story, but realizing that she actually had a connection to the man who was at the center of the story, and that the neighborhood where the story took place was a place that she had grown up and had deep roots in, and kind of what her process and sort of personal journey was like reporting that story. And then on the community member side, we have Stephen Contreras, who is sort of just an incredible human all around. He's sort of faced a ton of adversity through his life, and shown that he's been able to cope with it in a lot of interesting ways. And now he is on the board of a cannabis group here in Long Beach. So his story is more of a longer arc, I would say. It's not one scene or one event. It covers a lot of years, but it's interesting throughout. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have Laura Som, who was a refugee from Cambodia, and talks about arriving in America and not having any memory. She had gone through so much trauma when she was a child in Cambodia that by the time she got here, she didn't know what her favorite food was because she had forgotten, and kind of relearning and discovering her past through flashback and dream. So yeah, we have a really solid lineup of compelling storytellers. And I'm excited for Thursday, because they're all going to sort of bear witness to those stories then.
Now, I was asking Steph about this. So when people link on, they pay their $5, they get on.
Yeah.
They'll be, okay, so let's walk through it. Will this be like some of those well-known things like Moth, maybe This American Life? Is that kind of the setup? Like a person gets up and simply just starts telling their story, not reading it? Or will that be similar to what we're going to see?
This is a great question, and one of the great challenges of defining a medium that has yet to really be defined, especially in places outside of big cosmopolitan cities where storytelling is starting to take off. It very much is a new kind of thing. But what I would say to people who maybe aren't familiar with it is that we try and capture the energy of a close friend or a family member that is really good at telling stories, that might be the person sort of just leading the conversation at a dinner party or at a bar, right? So think about Thanksgiving dinner, and think about that uncle or aunt who is just kind of has an incredible life and is really good at communicating it through story at the table, and everyone is silent, kind of listening with bated breath. That's the energy that we try and capture and bring to these events. So it's not a literary reading. People do not pre-write their stories, and it's not stand-up comedy per se. The goal isn't explicitly to make you laugh, but it kind of sits somewhere in between those two mediums. So we're trying to tap into something that's real, that's authentic, and hopefully that gives people insights into some lives that, had they not come to this event, they would never know existed or were happening.
when you were working with the two non-journalists,
Mhm.
yourself, and by the way, he just got his master's from Stanford, so I'm a little intimidated here. But um, when you were working with those two, especially the woman who comes from Cambodia, working with her, I imagine, could call up some extremely painful memories. And yet I know that when you're a reporter, you're in the same position of sometimes trying to draw these things out. I'm just curious what your method is for going at stuff and where you kind of regulate yourself to say, okay, I need to ease off here a bit. How do you approach it, or do you just kind of go with how it feels to you?
Well, yeah, I certainly go with how it feels to me first, I think, um, and begin by listening. I mean, with her story, you nailed it. I mean, it is a really raw story that has trauma in it. Sometimes, even if it's not trauma, it's people that are embarrassed of things. We had a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist tell a story once where she talked about being fired from a paper. It wasn't her fault that she got fired. And in fact, there was a lot of humor kind of built into that. But we had to get her comfortable with sort of saying this to the entire world. And so my approach, I guess, is to listen first and to just ask a lot of questions. Um, and try and really, in the moment, yes, see it as their life, but also see it as a story.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, because what they have gone through is so close to home or so close to them, it takes more explaining than they think it does to make that story arc sort of come to life to an audience who has no idea where they're coming from or who they are.
Yeah.
So it does take a lot of probing, and I do push them pretty hard. I mean, I ask a lot of questions, and if they're uncomfortable, I give them their space. But at the end of the day, I want it to be the best story. So I do push, and I try and get them to get comfortable at their own speed, and eventually, yeah, tell the story.
We were talking earlier, what Steph and I do is more, I guess, traditional journalist is we go out and find stories and then we're the ones who report it. So in a way, we act as a filter between the person telling the story and the person reading the story. What you're doing is, I think, a little more direct. And I'm wondering if you believe that this is a type of storytelling. It seems to me that we're just on the cusp of that. We are going to
Yeah.
see more and more of this.
Hmm. I think we are. Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, it's true. I just graduated from journalism school,
Yeah.
and one rule that we're taught pretty early on is to never include ourselves in the story.
Right.
The story's not about you; it's not about us. We're told, and I think for a lot of use cases, that is the right advice, and it makes sense. However, I think to say that the journalist doesn't have a stake in a story that they're telling, or that they don't have their own story on once they come out on the other end of that reporting process is also not true. So what we're doing, I guess, is inviting journalists, to look inward a little bit and explain the process and explain what they went through in reporting the story. A, because we do think it's interesting, but B, because with the lack of trust in media right now, we think that if people are able to sort of see how the sausage is made, if they see the ingredients that go into a story, and they know all of the work and due diligence that make something a credible piece of journalism, then there's a chance that they might trust it a little bit more, or at the very least have a bit more reverence or respect for the process. So our goal is to help journalists seem more like people first and less like cogs in an institution. I'd say that's sort of the goal and the philosophy behind it. Whether or not we do that, I think people kind of have to come and check it out on their own. Yeah.
Steph, that sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? People, I even have people in my family who will say, the media, and then they'll say something negative, and I have to go,
Right.
I'm the media, and they're like, well, no, not you, but Steph, is that what resonated with you? Because I can tell you that Steph, when she heard about this, has been passionate about bringing this thing along. She's been talking about it for weeks and months. What was it, Steph, that really resonated with you, that you really wanted to make sure that we were part of this?
I think what Macardo was saying about that transparency and building trust, and we like to think that we speak in our own journalism lingo that we forget that some folks don't understand, like what makes it a
Right.
news story, what doesn't. So that's what really drew me to this experiment in storytelling, is just something that kind of shows you how our process is, why sometimes it takes months to tell a story too, and just everything that goes into it, and how many folks we have to interview. Not necessarily everyone's going to be published in that, but they all help inform our writing or reporting process. So for me, it was a lot of more of inviting the community in to see how it is for journalists, how we choose our stories, how we report on them, and just kind of building that trust with journalists. Right now, like you said, we're don't, with the newsrooms and journalism in general is not getting that kind of trust, and it's leading to a lot of misinformation and doubt. And with that doesn't help democracy.
Right.
Journalism is so essential to that. So that's something that kind of just stuck out to me, and made me really excited to experiment with this and just see what happens.
McCardle, I can tell you it's so bad because Steph and I work with a bunch of other really nice people that we know is just a bunch of really nice people. We can't imagine anyone would be afraid of them. And yet sometimes you'll go out to interview someone and you can tell they're terrified because you're not Steve, you're the media. And as I've gotten to be a veteran journalist, I'm in the role, a lot of veteran journalists as a mentor to younger reporters. And one thing I always tell them is if you get the sense that someone is really nervous, I will always mention something about my children. I'll just bring it up like, oh, hey, my kid's in a band or something like that. And I'm not joking. You will see their eyes, they'll go like, oh, you have kids? Like literally, oh, you're a human being. Oh, oh yeah, right. Because they do think you're this machine that is part of a bigger machine and that you're just there to make their lives miserable or whatever. And like I said, for us, it's hard for us to imagine because we just know all these people as regular people with regular problems and regular jobs. And so I think something like this is terrific in humanizing that even more.
That's right. Absolutely. And I should say that I don't think the public is, and I think you would agree with this. We don't think the public is to fault for their mistrust of media at all. I mean, they've been let down by journalists time and time again. And then you have that sort of a compounding effect when the president and others in positions of power are sowing distrust in oftentimes very credible journalism. So I'm empathetic to people who might not trust journalism right now or do see it as an institution that's inaccessible. I think what's perhaps cool about this project and something that we're certainly striving for is to kind of like you're doing when you tell them your son's in a band, to reach them on a more personal level and in a way that is a little bit. I guess we're trying to reach them personally and not professionally first, if that makes sense. So if we can kind of lead with entertainment or humor or story, then we think then that might be a good way into to opening up a dialogue and learning why not they trust us. Yeah.
Let's stick with story because here we are at this incredible point in our history. Technology makes for crazy things like what we're doing right now. And yet, McCardle, what you're doing is a complete circle to the absolute beginning of humanity. A bunch of guys sitting around the fire talking about that day's hunt, right? I mean, this is before paper, this is before internet, all that kind of stuff. The most primal kind of storytelling are people simply sitting and talking to each other about their story. Why do you think at this point in our history, again, where technology is unbelievable, that as far as our storytelling, we are returning to our most primal roots?
It's a good question. And I have to say, I don't have a perfect answer. I do think that having technology so accessible and so plentiful. I mean, if you type in any keyword, there's a story about it online, right? There's no shortage of information. That's not the problem. But I think if we can pause, right, and kind of come back and have slower news, slower journalism, and hear stories in a more human way, then it does speak to us in a different way, whether consciously or subconsciously. And that's my best guess at what's happening and why I think this medium works. I mean, we've seen people come to our shows who don't like news or don't necessarily connect with journalism, and those same people love the stories that the journalists are telling on stage. Um, and I think that that's probably part of it. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is part of our quest here, and what we're trying to figure out is why it's working and how we can make it work better.
Yeah, and it's all kinds of storytelling. I was watching one the other day. I think it was on Netflix or something like that. It is particularly a type of storytelling you might know that is basically about the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you. I don't know if you know this. Yeah, and it's just people come out and tell. Like at first you think it's going to be like, oh, I got splashed with water. No, it's horribly embarrassing stuff. And yet their ability to share it with an audience and the audience to be empathetic to say, I've been there too. I think you're right. I think, Steph, you and I wonder about this all the time as journalists. You always wonder, don't you? Like, are we making a connection with who we're writing about? I guess in storytelling, it would be much more direct. Yes.
Well, I think it also helps that you're seeing the faces, sometimes you just see the bylines and that doesn't really help. And I think, not a lot of journalists, or it's still even a new concept with social media, like, kind of like tweet threads of like, hey, this is behind the scenes of doing this, or, going on Instagram and kind of doing a little live video and stuff like that. So I think it's all about still that human connection and just seeing them physically, or, not physically, but, face to face.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, with Thursday's event, will there be the ability to interact between audience and storyteller?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something that we're experimenting with right now. Essentially, the information streams right now. Typically, when people think about journalists, it's one way, right? Journalists talk to people, and they can, and then the reader consumes the information. Very rarely does it go the other way. Yeah. So yeah, the goal with this event is to have journalists and the community members talking, but to also facilitate breakout rooms, which is a function on Zoom, the platform we're using, where the journalists and the other performers will be broken out into private groups with audience members so they can engage with them and have a dialogue in real time.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that. So they can follow up and ask them about the story and all this kind of stuff and move ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the event. So once they've heard and kind of have some content and I guess like something to connect over, we'll enable those breakout rooms.
Now, did I hear right? This is the first time this is going to be done actually via Zoom. It's been done as a live event before. Is this the first time you're doing it as a Zoom event?
This is our second time doing it as a Zoom event. We ran a beta test back in January, just as back pocket. So Local Lives we hadn't won the grant yet. We hadn't connected with any newsrooms, and we just wanted to sort of prove out the concept that we could do this thing virtually. And it was really successful. I mean, people stayed for the entire event. We sold a bunch of tickets. We got good feedback, and we were like, okay, this is great. Is there a way of having a broader impact with this, or a deeper impact with this? And we thought that the way of doing that was to reach audiences that weren't currently our own. And coming from journalism, I also am working with 4 other Columbia journalism grads. My co-founder studied at Becca, actually, at SF State with your son. And so we had all of these people that care about journalism, and we thought, okay, well, I think that makes sense as sort of the next place to go with it. And that's why we're here.
I'm curious, speaking of the future of journalism, McArdle, I'm getting up there in years. Steph's still young, you're still young. Having heard these stories, having just got out of school, what's your feeling about kind of the future of the profession? It's no doubt it's going through a lot of changes. We're still trying to figure out basically how to make money off some very new technology. You're doing something new like this. Are you optimistic, given all the things we've talked about, some negative views of journalism? Are you optimistic about the profession as a whole?
Mashed potatoes and gravy, Steve.
Yes. I don't know.
No, that's a quote from What About Bob, the old Bill Murray film from the late '80s, early '90s. He says that to something that's like really dire, I think. Mashed potatoes and gravy, as if it's going to be so easy.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know. Am I optimistic? I don't know if I'm optimistic. I think that yeah, the way media is currently, something is going to have to transcend it, be it the business model or the way that we're connecting with audiences. There's probably going to have to be a lot of different changes. I don't think that our project is going to be what tips the scale and saves journalism, but I do think that it could be a small part in a larger kind of evolution of where the industry's at today. And that's my goal, right? I mean, with this event, I say that we're here to help build trust and engagement between the newsroom and communities. It's going to be really hard for us to reach the people that believe in QAnon and other kind of far out conspiracy theories that aren't substantiated by anything in reality. Those aren't really the people we're going to be able to convert and get to trust the news. The people that we're hoping to kind of bring back into the milieu are the people that have maybe drifted away in the last 4 years and trust the media less, or have started reading more alternative news sites that are maybe not less credible. If we can reach them and engage them and show them that, look, there's still a ton of work being put into this, and that these journalists are people with good intentions that care about informing the community. If we can get a few of them back and help the newsrooms make a little bit of money in the process, then I think we will have been successful.
You know what, Ricardo and Steph, what I think is what you're doing, yes, in and of itself, this isn't going to be the model or to save journalism. But I think, like when I started in the early 80s at a very big, well, the Los Angeles Times, very big paper with a lot of money. And basically it was like, we'll write the stories, you read the stories, very clear cut roles. We write, you read. And I think what you're doing is more of where it's going, which is journalists being open to new, different ways and being okay with enlisting the reader as being more of a partner in that. Would you say that's fair, Steph?
I'd say so. Yeah, that's what I feel. I think it's going to be more of that collaboration that I see, and maybe I'm more optimistic, but I feel like we can bring in the conspiracy theorists into this. Everyone lives locally somewhere, and I think having these community stories and community members, it's like these are your neighbors, whoever you are, that you share grocery stores, libraries, everywhere. So I think it's going to be a different type of process, but I think ultimately, like readers, and we've seen this now just with like commercials, it's like just sell us advertising, just tell us up front what you want and how you want it from us. And I feel like that's where it's going to be. Some, reader contributions are going to be huge, and it's on us to build that trust and to tell them, we depend on you just as much as you depend on us to sustain this. So.
Steph, can you repeat for everybody when and where they can listen to Local Lives?
Yes, and I wanted to give a shout out to our performer that we'll have, Shy But Fly. She'll be the one opening our event for us as well. So I want to make sure everyone gets to listen to her as well. So her will be Laura Som, the executive director of the May Center, Stephen Contreras of the Long Beach Collective Association, Jeremiah Dobra, Chris Niebla, over journalists. And it'll be this Thursday, November 12th at 7 p.m. Links should be in the comment section of whatever streaming platform you're on this, and as well as our website, lbpost.com.
Okay, that's great. Steph, thanks for bringing this to everyone's attention and putting it together. Ricardo, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steph. Steph has been an incredible ally throughout this entire process. We feel lucky to be with Long Beach Post, especially for our first event. She's been amazing. And thanks, Steve, for the thoughtful questions. Mashed potatoes and gravy.
Say hi to my kid, okay? Thanks a lot.
I will.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. Hey,
go.
This is going to be a terrific event. Give it a listen on Thursday. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye. This is the Uncomfortable